Let's turn again to the Gospel of John, chapter 17. As we have looked at this part of God's Word, we have been breathing in the atmosphere of heaven as we have listened in to Yeshua praying to his Father on this last night of his physical presence on earth before he will go to give his life as the ransom for many, fulfilling the picture of Isaiah, of the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. And as we have looked at this part of God's Word, we have begun to see the heart of Yeshua, his desire, what is in the very heart of God, and we have seen his desire for this world that we live in and for us. As we turn there, let's pray together. We praise you, Father, that you prompted your servant John to write down what he heard that night and preserve it for us. And now we ask that you would reveal yourself to us through this encounter. Open our eyes, open our ears, open our hearts. In Yeshua's name, amen. We have come to verse 17 as we have been moving through this prayer. We ended with a note of Yeshua's gift of joy in verse 13 and how remarkable and wonderful that is. And as he is praying for his Talmidim, his disciples, as they will be in the world, he has been asking the Father to keep them in his name as he has kept them. The only one that was not kept is the one who did not belong to the Father or Yeshua. That was Judas, who has been betraying him even at this hour and is on his way, or perhaps gathering the guard that will go to arrest Yeshua. And Yeshua continues in his prayer for those who he's leaving in the world. In verse 17, his prayer is, "Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world, and for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by the truth." Yeshua has given himself wholly to his Father. He will give himself completely to his Father once again in a very short period of time, as he will enter the Garden of Gethsemane. And there we have seen in other Gospels what will happen as he prays. And prays, "Not my will, Father, but yours be done." And this is another step in that walk with his Father as he sanctifies himself, as he sets himself apart, as he gives himself afresh to his Father. And this is his desire for us, for all those who belong to him, that we would be set apart, that we would be made holy, that we would be pure, that it would be obvious to the world that we belong to God. Sanctification is one of those big words that sometimes we don't like because we don't understand it. It sounds too kind of musty and just hard to grasp. But it's a beautiful word because it's speaking of us experiencing the fullness of life in Yeshua, the abundance of life that he has for us. To know that we would experience his character, that we would experience this fullness. And Shaul would write about that in his letter to the Romans, and he talks about it in chapter 8. And he says that God is at work in the people who belong to him. And then he goes through the sequence, and he talks about God working everything for our good because we have come to love God and we have been called according to his purpose. And then he says that his purpose was that we would be conformed to the image of his Son. And then he says, gives the sequence, that was what we were predestined to. Those whom he has predestined, he has called. Those he has called, he has justified. And those he has justified, he has glorified. And the picture there, the completeness of this gift of life that Yeshua brings to us is seen in that sequence. That God, sometime that we don't know about, in his great love, has seen through history and has come to pick, to select, to choose in his wisdom, in his mercy, and in his grace. And then he has worked in our life and called. And when we have heard that call, we have responded by faith. And we have come to trust him and trust his word, as Yeshua has pointed out earlier, that we have kept his word and held it, that we have received him, that we have believed what he has said about himself. And we have come into that relationship, and then we were justified, which means that we, through Yeshua, have been declared righteous, and that Yeshua has taken on himself all of our sin and our wickedness. That is a reality, a heavenly reality. But then there is the sequence of living life. And you and I know, and Yeshua speaks about this, and Shaul has spoken about it in his letters, the sequence of continuing to grow in a relationship with Yeshua. We know that we still have that flesh in us, that fallen nature is being dealt a lethal blow, but we still struggle. We still do the wrong things. But we are more and more following Yeshua. We are more and more listening to the Spirit, the desires of the Spirit. And more, God's plan and design for us as his disciples is that we would be sanctified, that we would be holy, that we would more and more look like Yeshua in our character, in our affections, in our choices, in our thinking. So Yeshua is praying that we would be sanctified. And Shaul says that when this process is started, that it will certainly be completed. We will be glorified. We will be completely holy and righteous and perfect in Yeshua, but not yet. We are on our way as long as we are on this planet. And thus comes Yeshua's prayer. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. This is why we treasure the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah. This is why we share it week by week as we look at the Torah together, and why we listen and read, why this is so important to us. Because Yeshua has given this to us, his truth, to sanctify us, to help us walk with him in relationship with him, to be transformed. His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. His words are our very life. We know that we don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Your word is truth. Yeshua has said earlier that I am the way and the truth and the life. And he speaks truth out of himself. Truth can sometimes be propositional statements, but primarily it is a revelation of the character of God himself. It is a revelation of who God is and how life is to be lived in him. It is reality, and it is moral depth and righteousness. Your word is truth, and your word helps us to grow. It helps us to become more and more like you. And he prays this, Yeshua prays this, because he is sending them into the world as the Father has sent him into the world. And he's already said that these whom you've given me, Father, that you've picked them out of the world. They are no longer a part of this world system that is built on godlessness, of living life apart from God, not necessarily as evil as it can be, but certainly without reference to God. And yet, you have brought them to life in you, so they are not a part of that world system, but they are still a part of the world, as you and I are. And we considered last time that Yeshua said he's praying not for the world, but for these God had picked out of the world. And once again, this helps us see that Yeshua loves the world as his Father does. And that Yeshua is working in the world to manifest his Father and to draw people to himself, that they may have life. And part of this whole process, these disciples he will send, and these disciples will be made holy and like him through his truth, through his word. And for their sakes, for our sakes, Yeshua has set himself apart, that he will do the will of his Father, that they also may be set apart, that you and I would be set apart for himself. He is showing us the glory and the wonder of a life yielded fully to the Father. He is helping us see that it is the best thing in the world for you and I to give ourselves wholly and unreservedly to God. We struggle with that. I struggle with that. So it's so good to remember that Yeshua is praying for us in that very area, that he has prayed and is continuing that as he is interceding for us as our great high priest at the Father's right hand even now. And in verse 20, Yeshua continues his prayer, and he says, I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe me through their word, that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. The testimony of what Yeshua prayed here is fulfilled in us. We are the recipients of the answer to that prayer. I pray for those who will believe through their word. These 11 men, out of these 11 men, they spread the word. 120 gathered in the upper room in just 50 days from these times. And the Spirit was poured out, and they gave testimony. They shared the word. And 3,000 came to the Lord that day. And it kept on growing and growing. They shared the word of who Yeshua is. The gospel continued to spread, and it has spread to this very day. And here we are, nearly 2,000 years later, the beneficiary of this glorious prayer. That through their word we have come to believe. And their word was spoken by them, but there were some that were selected by God, like John, to record things that God wanted recorded. Levi, Matthew, has written the gospel. John has written this gospel in 3 letters and a revelation. Peter, Kepha, would write 2 letters. A couple of the Lord's brothers, earthly brothers, would write a couple of the letters, Judas and James. And then one born out of season, Shaul of Tarsus, would write a good portion of the Berit Hadashah, the word that is part of God's revelation, the part of the word that we have heard and come to believe and come into relationship with him. And Yeshua's desire for all of us is that we would be one. And in fact, it's a declaration of a reality that we are one. In Yeshua, we are one. We are one with him and the Father. And he begins to unpack this a little bit as he prays that this is not just a uniformity. Sometimes when I ride the transit across Vancouver, I'll ride at a certain time of day, and there will be young men and women that will get on the bus, and they all look alike. They come from a school that has a dress code where they all have the same outfits on. I understand that. That is called uniformity. That is not called oneness or unity. So it's important for us to see that this oneness that Yeshua has said we have and is inviting us into to experience the fullness of it. This is a oneness that is much deeper than externals. It's much deeper than how we dress or even how we choose to live out life. It is an internal thing primarily and first of all. And that is borne out by what Yeshua says in his prayer. That they may be one, Father, verse 21, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us. It is primarily relationship. It is primarily conviction. It is primarily faith. One that we have believed brings us together as one. We are here because we believe Yeshua is the Messiah. We are here because we believe God, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, is the one and only true God. And we are here gathered around Yeshua because we believe that in him and in him alone is life. That in him and in him alone is access to the Father through him. And we believe that he and he alone is the one who has taken care of the issue that would separate us from God, our own rebellion and pride and sinfulness, seeking to live life apart from God, apart from reference to God. These are the deepest elements of unity. Shaul, that great follower of Yeshua, will write a letter some years later, and his letter to the Ephesians, if you could turn there with me. Ephesians chapter 4. Shaul is writing about the unity, the oneness that we share in Yeshua. And in verse 3, he writes of chapter 4 of Ephesians, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So he's indicating that there's a unity and a oneness that the Spirit gives. It's not something that we work up and create. It is rather something that we are invited and challenged and called to keep. And then he talks about elements of this oneness. There is one body in verse 4. We are one body in Yeshua. There is one Spirit. We were called with one hope, one Lord, one faith, one immersion, one God and Father of all, who is above all, through all, and in you all. And then to each one of us was given the grace according to the measure of Messiah's gift. And then he talks more about this unity and how God has been at work in his Kehelah to bring this about. In verse 11, he says, "And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Messiah." And why? Why did he give these people with these giftings? To build us up in Messiah. In verse 13, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect, complete, whole man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. We here together are gifted and given gifts by the Father, gifts of people who help us grow, who build us up, that we would come to greater and greater oneness. And that oneness is rooted primarily in two things. It is that we learn to trust God more fully, faith, and that we learn to know God more deeply, knowledge. And it's not that this is of the Son of God as so much as it's his faith and his knowledge. That we come as we grow in him, as Yeshua helps us together, that we come to see how trustworthy God is. We see what Yeshua saw in the Father. And we come to trust him like Yeshua trusted him without reservation. And we come to know the Father ever more deeply as Yeshua knew the Father and knows the Father. And we come as we grow in this faith and knowledge that Yeshua had, that he wants us to grow in. We continue to grow in that so that we would no longer be children. So there's a picture there that we're growing. We start out as born and children, and this oneness is there, but it's weak and wobbly. And then we continue to grow. And we grow so that we are no longer children, tossed back and forth by this new doctrine or that new teaching, but we are delivered from trickery and from cunning craftiness and from deceitful plots, not only of people but of the enemy. And together, this comes back to the Word, sanctified by the truth. Your Word is truth. But speaking the truth in love, we grow up in all things into him who is the head, into Messiah, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, causes growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. Yeshua prayed that people like Shaul would come into relationship with him. And Yeshua prayed for people like us, that we would come into a relationship with him through the truth. And that as we come into this relationship with him, we would know the oneness that we have with one another who believe and trust him. And that we would grow in that oneness, that the world would know that Yeshua was sent from the Father, sent from heaven, that he is God made flesh. That is what Yeshua is praying for. That is what Yeshua says is going to happen, is a reality, that we are one, that we may be one, that we would realize this oneness. As he was in the Father, that he is in us, we are in him, the most intimate of relationships, that he is our all in all. And that brings us to unity and oneness together. Well, back in John 17, continuing in Yeshua's prayer, Yeshua again in verse 22 comes to what he began the prayer with. He speaks of it again. And the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one just as we are one. The glory, Yeshua's heart is set on the glory of the Father. Yeshua has been honored by the Father throughout his life. Yeshua has been glorified by the Father as Yeshua has obeyed the Father and has manifested his glory. And that glory is what Yeshua has received from the Father, what he gives to us. We have experienced the Father's glory, insight into the glorious wonder of who the Father is, the treasure that he is. And that brings us to a greater oneness as well, that they may be one just as we are one. The Father and the Son are one. I and the Father are one, Yeshua said. Distinct and yet one. And in verse 23, I and them, you and me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. The glorious oneness that the Father gives us is touched by his glory and is something that he says here he makes perfect, which is what we just discussed with Shaul, and that the love that the Son has loved us with, the Son has been loved by the Father, and that they would then experience, that we would experience that same love. It is depth and mystery and wonder. The Father, the Son, us together. The Son in us. The Father and the Son. It speaks of the depth of relationship. And it speaks of the depth of oneness that the Father is bringing about in our lives together. And then in verse 24, Yeshua prays again, saying to his Father, Father, I desire that they also whom you gave me may be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory, which you have given me, for you loved me before the foundation of the world. The heart's desire of our great God is intimacy of relationship with us, with me. Yeshua's desire is that we would be with him. Why did Yeshua become Emmanuel? Because he wanted us with him. Why did Yeshua, why did the Father, why did the Spirit create people? Because he wanted to manifest his glory. And he wanted a people who would experience him and know the glory and the wonder of who he is. You see, God is completely self-sufficient, totally happy, full of joy from all eternity. We've seen that suggested here, that before the foundation of the world, that the Father was loving the Son, and the Son was loving the Father, and the Spirit was there. And so there has never been a time when God has had any lack. God never needed anything. God did not create humanity and the world because he was lonely. He was not. God did not create because he had a lack, a need. He had none. Out of the overflow of his love and his glory and his joy, he created. And he created a people that have genuine freedom of choice. And he invites us into relationship with himself. He created us for relationship with himself, and that relationship is so intimate, it's called with me and even in me, and I in you. That is what he was doing throughout history. That's why he made us, that we would be displays of his glory. And when the fall happened, it didn't shock him. Before the foundation of the world, Yeshua and the Father had talked together in the mystery of that mystery of mysteries. And already there was a plan in place. And Yeshua was coming to this very moment, this very night, and would give his life for us, that we could come in that relationship with him. Emmanuel, God with us, that we might be with him. The tabernacle was a picture of that. Moshe was given that picture, and God revealed to him that he wanted that so that God could dwell among the children of Israel. Nothing else can satisfy us. Nothing else can fulfill any human being other than God himself in us and with us, and we with him. And that is what Yeshua came to bring about. That was the whole new covenant. That was what Jeremiah spoke about, that the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law in their minds. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no more shall every man teach his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. The new covenant means God can be with us and in us. His very word is in us, dwelling in us. We are seeing the glory of the Son and the Father, the full manifestation of who they are, of their character, of their desires for this world and for us, for all eternity. Yeshua's desire is that all of us would be with him where he is. And of course, this speaks to that day that we are moving towards with such great speed. The day when you and I will see him face to face. And John writes about this in his first letter. In chapter 3, he says, Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called the children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved, now, this moment, we are the children of God, and it has not yet been revealed the fullness of what we shall be. But we know that when he is revealed, when we see him face to face, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is in his glory. Yeshua desires that we would experience him now in the fullness of his glory, but he's also praying that we see him that day in the fullness of his glory. We're headed that way. We see glimpses of glory now as in a glass, dimly, but one day, face to face, one day we will see that it was indeed worth it all, that it was right for us to place our full trust in him. We will see that the very best thing to have ever done was to have fully given ourselves to him, unreservedly. We will see the glory of the Son, and we will know the fullness of his love. Yeshua continues in John 17 and verse 25, O righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you, and these, all my disciples, know that you sent me. We know that. Those first disciples knew that, and every disciple since, every genuine disciple, every genuine follower of Yeshua knows that the Father sent the Son, and the Son came joyfully and delightfully to give his life for us and to live in relationship with the Father. And in verse 26, I have declared to them your name. Again, the name of God, Hashem, that glorious name. And of course we know that throughout the Scripture, God has revealed himself through his names. There are more names and more names, wonderful insights into the very character of God. The name is all that God is, all the character that he is, all his thoughts and actions, the glory and the wonder of who he is. Yeshua has declared that to us and to these who he's praying in the presence of. And he will continue to declare it. He declares it to us through this written word, through his Spirit who is among us and in us. And I will continue to declare it. And his desire is that the love with which you loved me may be in them and I in them. So there it is again. It goes together. We know the character of God. We know God. We see him. We have insight about him. We have revelation knowledge. We have the Son manifesting the Father to us. And as we grow in that knowledge, that is more than just information, it is encounter. As we grow in that, we also grow in experiencing and knowing the love that the Son has received from the Father. How has the Son been loved by the Father? We've seen glimpses of it. We saw it when Yeshua was first born. And in the gospel that Levi wrote, the Gospel of Matthew, talks about the wicked king of the day who wanted to execute Yeshua. And the Father loved the Son by speaking to Yeshua's earthly parents, Joseph and Miriam. And he said, arise and take the child and leave and go to Egypt. And they took the child and went to Egypt. And Yeshua's life was spared. And then when Yeshua came on the scene at approximately the age of 30, and he came to Yohanan the immerser, to John the Baptist, and he came to be immersed. And after he was immersed, there was a voice that came from heaven. And the Father said to the Son, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. He honored the Son. He claimed him as his own. And then Yeshua will say in this gospel in chapter 5, we saw him after he had healed the invalid at the pool. Most assuredly I say to you, said Yeshua, the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, whatever the Father does, the Son also does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does, and he will show him greater things, greater works than these, that you may marvel. And then at the side of Lazarus' tomb, as Yeshua had spoken of the glory of God being manifest and the stone being rolled back so that you could get access to Lazarus' body, he said in that chapter, in John 11, then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Yeshua lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. The Father always heard the Son. And you see, in Yeshua, we experience that same love. The protection of the Father over our lives. The Father keeps us, the Son keeps us by His name, by all that He is, by His character. The Father acknowledges us as His own. We are His beloved children, and He says that. He acknowledges that, and one day He will say that before all the hosts of heaven. This is mine. This is mine. You are mine. You are my son. You are my daughter, because you have trusted Yeshua. He will own us. And in these days, He loves us and shows us what He's doing around our lives and invites us to join Him in that. And He listens to our prayers because we come not in our own name, but we come in the name of Yeshua. I have declared to them your name, and will declare it, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. We have breathed in the atmosphere of heaven. We have heard the lover of our soul pour out His love for us before the Father. We have heard Him pray indescribable things for us. Bless His holy name.